I recently had an experience. My therapist was off for like 3 weeks. She was out of the country. And I had this experience and I was so happy to tell her when she got back. And it felt like a big moment. And I know that she probably had thought it, obviously, for these many years. And it's not like we never talked about it. But I thought, I think this is a very common experience. And it is that for so many of us on the outside, we are very much living lives of adults, right? We are running families, running businesses, taking care of our homes, our pets, whatever. But oftentimes there's a child inside, the inner child, who is always afraid of getting in trouble. And you don't realize it. It's such a part of who you are that, for example, a decision I was thinking about making, what I kept coming back to was this fear that it was going to trigger some people in my life and there was going to be some consequence. And that was not like an irrational thought. In fact, it probably will happen that way. But what was getting in my way was like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. And there were periods in my life where getting in trouble could have meant a monetary impact or something like that, where, there was a reason for me to be afraid. Like doing this could equal that. But sometimes that being afraid lingers long after. And to be fair, at some point I was like, I am 55 years old. Why am I still afraid of this? And I will handle the outcome. And so I do want to say though, that at some periods in your life, it sounds good to just like, own that and do what you want. But there might be some significant consequences. But when there really are things you can't control anymore, regardless of the consequences, oftentimes those of us who had certain types of dynamics in childhood are still very much hypervigilant and sensitive to hurting people's feelings, to their unhappy emotions, to being in trouble, to thinking that we did something wrong, and it can really run the show in our lives. So I thought we'd talk about the relationship between complex PTSD and always feeling like you're in trouble. Now, of course, we know that a lot of our nervous system responses to emotionally unsafe parents, if you had to scan all the time and live in hypervigilance, what we're talking about is a childhood where you're always having to be on guard and alert because you don't necessarily know what's coming next. And if you had a parent who raged a lot, got mad a lot, whatever, they maybe were mad at you a lot, or they fought with the other parent a lot in front of you, but you witnessed a lot of anger and confrontation where somebody was in trouble. And as kids are egocentric in general, especially when we talk about trauma, we know that we often believe that at the core, even though we have no language for it, that it's our fault somehow, that we are the reason why our parents weren't available or loving, or why they got divorced, or why they don't show up for custody. And the truth is, it has nothing to do with us. But unfortunately, that's often what we believe, and that starts to color our experience. So, when and why and how does this happen? Number one, it happens when you have no power in childhood, where really no child does, right? It's like, no matter what is happening, you don't have the luxury of pushing back and expressing yourself in most families. In some you do. It's fine to say, like, I'm mad at you and I don't like what you did. But in other homes, that would have been punished. And especially when we look at parenting over the, last 50 years or more, there hasn't been any centering of kids. And so you have no power in general because, like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? But you have no power to change your circumstance. And so if a parent is mad or angry and you believe it's your fault, or they tell you, you're so naughty, why'd you do that? What's wrong with you? Things like that, you have no power to change that experience. Number two, you learn to make meaning out of everything. So if your childhood had a lack of emotional safety or otherwise, you learn that paying attention to, as I've talked about in so many videos, sensory triggers, tone of voice, sounds, things like that, a parent's mood, the certain day of the week, the way they drove the car, whatever it was, all of that had meaning. And the better you got at interpreting what that meant, the better you could protect yourself. So maybe you could go to your room, or you could go outside and play, whatever it was. And so you learn to make meaning. The problem is the meaning that you make as you grow up is often automatically, oh, it's my fault, I did something wrong. And you haven't learned to hold the space and nuance for how to challenge all the other things that could potentially be, right? We just go to, oh, my partner's in a bad mood, they're mad at me, I did something wrong. Oh, my kids are having a bad day, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Or even if we know up here, like, it's not our fault, when we've been trained to take on other people's feelings, like our parents, it's really hard to shake that off. That's the whole, like, empath thing, I think. I'm not talking about being highly sensitive, which is often common too, but where you've learned to just, like, be overly empathic, take on everyone else's feelings because that meant something for you. And now you're this person who goes around trying to take care of everyone else, but you often neglect yourself. So the next one is the parents either were upset at you, like I said, or they were upset in front of you. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, or you were in trouble. You actually were in trouble a lot, and you've made that has been a very difficult experience, often because you were shamed, blamed, punished, whatever. The next one is you were literally blamed or criticized or controlled. So there was no real space for you to express yourself and have imperfections. It was like you were, no matter the littlest things, how you ate your food, how you did the coloring and the lines or not. Like everything was either like directly criticized or passively aggressively criticized or sarcastic. So it's just like all this like poking about what you were doing, and it always came back to you weren't doing it right or enough or whatever that was. The next one is at the core, of course, you had parents with insecure attachment, right? So either they were not there and you blamed yourself. Well, they're not here because of me. It's my fault and there's something wrong with me. And so I need to make sure I don't get anyone upset with me because they might leave me. Or they were actively, aggressively telling you things or blowing up on you, or they were anxious and then they would lose it on you, whatever it is. But you've had attachment wounds that have really dictated this experience. The next one is there was a lot of anger and unsafe or lacking communication skills. So you weren't taught reciprocity, you weren't taught confrontation, you weren't taught it's okay to disagree. It's like anger was, for many reasons, unsafe. Number 7 is that basically the core belief you're carrying is that, as I said in the beginning, that you are a mistake, that you are bad, that you're unlovable, and so your automatic go-to an assessment which colors every interaction alongside everything else I said, from the nervous system to sensory triggers to making meaning, is that it always centers and comes back to the core wound of you being at fault. So it's really easy to take that belief. It's like this, the skin that covers your body, it's always your fault. So what can you do? The first thing is to start to challenge the evidence. When you go into that collapsed sort of child state or that hypervigilant fight or flight state, to try to slow down and breathe and ask yourself, okay, I'm blaming myself for this, but like, what is the evidence this is my fault? How would I respond if this was someone else's story? Would I think it was their fault? How much of this narrative is just my go-to, my automatic belief thought? Automatic thought process, I should say, versus reality. So what's really going on? Maybe you want to write it down on a piece of paper, draw columns, the whole thing. The next one is, who is feeling this? Is this the inner child that just always makes this feeling feel true? Is this my adult body and adult self? Where does this feeling come from? Where did this originate? What's happening right now? The next one is, if I didn't feel this kind of way, what would I do differently? So I wasn't automatically assuming I did something wrong, it's my fault, I'm going to get in trouble, or I can't handle this. What would I do differently if that wasn't my automatic thought or belief? And then what would I like to do differently? The next one is trying to look at how oftentimes the nonverbals, the sensory dynamics are really affecting what you believe. So you're doing that meaning making thing, and you're kind of pulling at evidence. Oh, my mom rolled her eyes. My child is in a huffy tone with me. But it's not about them. It's about the meaning that you've learned to make of all of those sensory things, because really you first learned those skills in childhood. So trying to separate it out. And even if they did do those things, do I have to personalize that to me? Is there a place that is the case that I want to make a repair? Did I do something wrong? I want to change or modify. Do I need to listen to feedback here? Am I pushing too hard against the truth because I don't want to hear it, because it makes me feel bad about myself? But actually, you're right. I didn't handle that as well as I'd like to. Things like that. And then what is the narrative? That's the thing. It's like the narrative might be, I'm a bad child. And if that's your go-to, maybe you can create a statement that you can identify and say, oh, that's where I go there. I always go into, it's my fault. I did something wrong, I'm unlovable, and to challenge that narrative with something different, like I'm actually not a bad child. I was never a bad child then, I'm not now, I'm not perfect, but I'm loving and caring, and I know how to own my mistakes, or I'm working on making mistakes, how to make mistakes and repair them and own my part in things, but also hold others accountable, things like that. You want to challenge that, like I'm saying, this is an old narrative, and once again, if there is something that I need to change, because even though I'm not bad inside or wrong, I don't like the way I handled that. What would that be? And what belongs to me, what belongs to the other person, things like that. I think I kind of repeated those, but I think that's important because sometimes there may be a place where we're like, yeah, I'm not a bad child, I didn't do anything wrong, but I really wish I'd had more patience in that response, or I wish I wouldn't have just assumed things, or I got a little defensive there, and I need to make space for other people's, feelings and opinions. Even if I don't agree with them, it doesn't make them bad or wrong, and doesn't make me bad or wrong. So those are the common dynamics, I think, for the Cptsd or childhood trauma as it relates to feeling like we're always in trouble. Feel free to post down below anything else you think might be helpful. And I appreciate you so much. Your little inner child is not in trouble, so thank you for being here. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.